Summer 1995. Two Boy Scouts vanish after a troop meeting as a storm rolls in. For 9 years, everyone blames the flood, until a logger's blade hits metal deep in Red Cedar Forest. Under the pines is a buried container. Inside, ruined mattresses, a dead CD player, and a pendant on a red cord from the boy's last photo. One serial number on a hidden vent leads to an HVAC tech and exposes a staged scout knot. One brother is found. One isn't. The container tells the rest. July 15th, 1995 begins like any summer Saturday near Red Cedar State Forest. At the Hale home, 2 scout uniforms hang by the door, the caps tucked into the bands the way Mason prefers, the shoelaces double knotted the way Tyler learned from him. The kitchen counter is set with their favorite after-meeting snacks. The wall clock slides past 4:15 p.m., and Joanna glances at the driveway again. She calls the scoutmaster to double-check the end time. Mr. Rhodes says they wrapped at 3:30 sharp, and even squeezed in a troop photo by the trailhead before the clouds turn strange. Mason is usually prompt, she says aloud, and Daniel nods, already reaching for the landline to call other parents. Each call brings the same answer. The boys said goodbye and peeled off together. No one saw them head to the parking lot. By 5 o'clock, the air pressure feels heavy, and a low hum seems to settle over the neighborhood. Trees at the property line shift in a way that suggests more than a passing shower. The dog will not step off the porch. The boys' rooms remain tidy and waiting. An open comics issue on Mason's desk. A slingshot Tyler made from a forked stick and red cord. When the first thick drops hit the deck rail, they leave dark coins on the wood. Joanna walks the hallway, checks both beds as if the boys could have appeared while she was on the phone. Daniel pulls on boots and stands at the edge of the yard, scanning the tree break where the footpath begins. The feeling is not yet panic, but it is no longer routine concern. The storm siren in town tests once a month. Today, it feels like the sky is doing its own test. At 5:40 p.m., Joanna calls the sheriff's office and states the words that do not feel real in her mouth. Our sons are overdue from a scout meeting. Their last known location is the South Trailhead. The dispatcher takes details with the steady tone of someone who knows that minutes matter most at the start. A deputy on patrol is already heading toward the forest road. Daniel's truck lights sweep the shoulder as he turns out, and Joanna stands in the doorway watching the brake lights fade. The porch light clicks on early and will not be turned off again for a long time. By early evening, the forecast crosses from warning to a severe event. The front rides a hard edge of wind that tastes like metal. Pine tops whip and shed needles. At the South Trailhead, the gravel lot that hosted the troop an hour earlier now sits under a fast-moving veil of rain. The first deputies arrive, but their radios catch nothing but static and gust noise. Mr. Rhodes drives back to meet them with a printed roster. He points at the spot where they lined up the boy for the photo and explains the release routine. Elliot Greer, 12, arrives with his mother. He says Mason and Tyler mention a plan to check HQ, their name for a cave in a ravine reached by a side path not on any map. They had asked him to come, but he saw the sky turning green-gray and decided to head home. He remembers Mason saying they could beat the storm if they moved quick. The deputies look toward the timberline, but visibility has fallen to a sheeted wall. Procedure says do not throw people into risk when the outcome would be more victims. They mark coordinates, relay a hold until the worst passes, and shift to a perimeter approach. Notify park rangers. Alert state police, ping hospitals, keep eyes on road exits. Note any stranded vehicles. Back at the Hale home, Joanna packs a small bag, water, spare socks, a flashlight and batteries, a whistle, and then sits with it in her lap as the house creaks under the wind. Daniel calls in from the trailhead and says the plan is to launch at first light if the storm lets them. He does not say the other sentence in his mind. If the boys tried for the ravine and the water rose fast, the cave could have turned into a trap. The storm builds to its full voice after dark. Power flickers and holds. The clock on the stove blinks and then steadies. Near midnight, the rain hits in arrows. Somewhere in the distance, a large branch breaks with a sound that feels too close. Joanna keeps the phone line clear and waits for a call that does not come. At 2 a.m., the house feels like a boat. At 4:30, the rain slackens enough to hear the air moving again. Dawn will come gray and low, and with it, the first push into the woods. Sunrise is a dim bruise along the eastern trees. Search coordinators set up a folding table at the trailhead and lay out a topo map under clear plastic. Volunteers sign in and receive assignments in small teams with a team lead, a compass, and 2 radios per group. Rangers speak to the risks plainly. Debris fields, undermined ground, stream crossings that were ankle-deep yesterday and are waist-deep now. Elliot arrives again and traces the line to the place he calls HQ, a side drainage that drops away from the main path, then hooks behind a rock lip and into a narrow cut. He explains that the cave mouth is small and sits under roots that hang from a bank. He remembers they stashed a tin there once with old coins and a note. Teams move out with bright tape to mark return points, calling out at intervals to keep sound in range. The forest is altered. Logs sit crossways in gullies like fallen scaffolds. Leaves plaster the ground and hide slick clay. A group finds a boot print that could be from any teenage foot and flags it for later measure. Radios check in on the hour with brief status lines. Around mid-morning, one team calls, possible ravine match, debris near a dark opening. The coordinator has them hold perimeter and wait for a ranger with ropes. The slope is unstable and shows fresh slide scars. Silt lines lace the rock like tide marks. The cave mouth is half choked with wet leaves, twigs, and a tumble of soil. A cold draft carries the smell of earth and old water. They clear the opening by hand, careful not to kick anything downslope. The entrance is not tall. An adult must crouch to pass. Inside, the floor is new mud over older packed dirt. The team lead calls for quiet and listens for anything that could be a human voice, but all they hear is the slow drip of runoff settling. A light sweep shows the curve of the chamber and a raised spot where water has not coated the wall. On that wall, the mud line runs high. The lead steps back out for air and notes a root system that hangs like a curtain over one side of the mouth. Something red sits against the brown there, not bright, but not natural. He does not touch it. He calls it in. Pinned to an exposed root, a red cord is tied in a complex hitch. It is not a simple overhand. It wraps in a way that suggests practice, a skill taught and earned. Elliot's face changes when he sees it. Mason learned that friction hitched this summer and would tie it around chair legs at meetings to show how it could grip under load. He would have loved the roots here because they give a natural anchor. The team photographs the cord in place, shows scale, and then cuts it free for later analysis. Inside the cave, the high water line stands as a plain story. In the worst of the storm, the ravine funneled water straight into the chamber and filled it fast enough to leave debris lodged several feet up the stone. The air is cool and stale. There is no sign of camp, no wrappers, no lantern soot, no initial scratched where boys often prove they were there. The working theory takes shape because it fits what they see. The brothers reached the cave and waited. The water rose, and either they were caught and overcome or they fled in the dark and rain, losing the path in unstable ground. The cord becomes the last known sign. It anchors the timeline and edges the hope downward. Yet it also widens the search area because it offers no direction beyond they made it this far. Teams fan out from the ravine in broader arcs. A helicopter makes passes when the ceiling lifts, but the canopy is thick and the view is a green roof. Divers check swollen pools where the stream bends and deepens. K9 units work scent lines until the flood scours erase any thread. Joanna and Daniel speak briefly with the coordinator at the trailhead and are told the truth, not the worst possibilities, but the real limits of the day. They hold each other by the truck and look at the sky that is finally patching to blue. Elliot sits on a cooler and turns the red cord in his hands after his photographed. remembering the way Mason laughed when a knot bit clean and the small look of pride that passed between brothers when a trick became a tool. Days become a schedule of grids. Volunteers rotate through, logging hours before work and after dinner, moving in lines with poles to probe soft ground and mark anything that breaks the pattern. State police bring mapping equipment to track covered areas. Media trucks park by the road for noon and 6 o'clock updates, then thin when there is nothing new to film. The church organizes meals for searchers and collects bottled water. Divers work slow sections again when levels fall. A jacket fragment turns out to be from a hunter who lost it last fall. A footprint dissolves under closer look. The map on the table gathers highlighter swaths like a quilt. Parents from other troops send letters. Someone hangs a simple sign at the trailhead that says, "Bring them home." Weeks later, with no clothing, no gear, no confirmed track, the official report uses careful language about probable drowning and flash flooding. The cave's waterline is noted as the most persuasive physical fact. The cord's not as listed as likely tied by Mason based on testimony from his friend. The case number is moved into a drawer for cold files, but not forgotten in the town. Joanna keeps the boys' room steady and dusted. Daniel starts the truck at odd hours because he cannot sleep and drives to the trailhead to sit and watch the dark. Elliot returns to school in the fall and notices that teachers use the boys' names softly. Mr. Rhodes frames the troop photo from the last meeting and hangs it in the church hall. On the first storm of the next summer, Joanna stands at the window and counts her breaths until the rain weakens. She sets a second lamp in the front room and says, out loud, that the porch light will stay on every night. The forest heals the scoured cuts at the ravine and sends new growth over the slopes. The story becomes a caution the scouts learn in safety briefings. Weather can turn a shelter into a trap. Always check drainages. Never outrun water down a slot. For the Hales, the story is not a teaching tool. It is a line that time does not cross. On the next July 15th, they sit side by side and say the names in order and say them again. 9 summers pass. In 2004, a new cut block opens deeper in Red Cedar than the old search ever reached. Logging crews clear brush, mark boundaries, and move heavy equipment along temporary roads that snake through second growth and bristle past old stumps. On a clear afternoon, operator Caleb Garner swings a feller buncher through scrub pine near a shallow depression. The machine jolts hard, not with the dull refusal of rock, but with a sharp ring that travels up the frame and into his hands. He kills the hydraulics and climbs down. Under a mat of needles and loam, a patch of rust shows through. The crew gathers, half curious, half impatient. A shovel strike throws orange flakes. The shape turns into a square with corners. Hinges surface on one side. It is a hatch set into something larger. The debate starts at once. They're behind schedule, calling the county will freeze the site. It is likely an old waste tank or a hunter's cellar. If they cover it now, there is no problem later. Caleb looks at the hinge pins and the thick plate and cannot square it with a farm tank, not this far from any structure. He thinks about his 2 kids and about the stories people tell around campfires that are not always stories. He climbs into his pickup and drives until his phone pings a bar, then makes a call. Deputies meet the crew at the gate and bump down the spur road. They tape a perimeter and keep everyone out of the depression. The county gets a backhoe on site. The machine peels back soil and roots to show the edge of a metal wall below the hatch. A rectangle grows until they can see it is the roof of a container, long and flat and buried in a trench. The sides are coated with thick rust and moss. When they lever the hatch, the seal fights and then lets go with a sting of air that smells like damp and time. No one goes in. They bring in lights and wait for investigators. The machines go quiet. The woods sound loud again. Wind and needles, a woodpecker tapping, the far beep of a truck reversing as the crew pulls back to give room. Caleb stands with his hands shoved into his sleeves and watches men in clean coveralls walk toward the hatch with clipboards and he feels a small certainty that drives away any doubt about the delay. Some things, once found, must be brought all the way into the light. The container's interior has the scale of a small trailer, but feels smaller because the ceiling is low and the air is spent. Investigators move carefully with respirators, latex, and evidence lights. Along one side lie two mattresses that have lost all shape. Mold feathers the cloth. The floor carries a layer of dirt, rust grit, and rodent mess. In the corner, a stack of aluminum cans crush underfoot. Wrappers from snack cakes and chips sit matted together. Their logos from years when colors and typefaces looked slightly different. A portable CD player lies on its back with a cracked lid, as if someone set it down one day and never touched it again. A handful of plastic jewel cases hold discs for bands popular among teenagers around the turn of that decade. The room does not read like a hunter's cache. It reads like long-term stay by people with nothing but simple things to pass hours. On a shelf made from a board and bricks, a tin sits with a film of rust. Inside are small items without value. A button, a marble, 3 pressed leaves. On the rough seam of one mattress, a glint of a circle catches a flashlight. A small pendant on a faded red cord is worked into the fabric as if it snagged, and then was forgotten or hidden. An investigator frees it, photographs it, and slips it into a bag. The pendant is not distinctive at first glance, but its pattern is unusual enough to deserve a database check. Outside, the evidence text log each item and close bins. The sheriff on scene has worked 2 decades and says he has never stood in a place like this. He does not say the rest of what he thinks, which is that the room feels designed, not improvised, and that the hatch's thickness implies an intention to keep people in as much as to keep weather out. A call goes out to the state lab for serial numbers on mechanical pieces. A second call goes to analysts who manage cold files. When a pendant crosses a report from 9 years ago and a photo of 2 brothers in scout uniforms, the energy around the hatch changes to something tight and focused. The work does not speed up. It slows down to avoid losing even a thread. The container holds more than food trash and old entertainment. Along the roofline inside, they find vent fittings that do not match the container's original hardware. Ductwork disappears into the soil through bored holes that have been sealed. Outside, a sweep of the area finds an intake far from the hatch hidden in brush, and an exhaust that vents into a tangle of deadfall. The fans are not cheap box units. They are industrial inline models meant for continuous duty, paired with filters rated for high efficiency. On one metal housing a serial number still reads through the oxidation. Investigators trace the model to a manufacturer that kept old distributor lists. Paper trails are not kind after 9 years, but one regional supplier still holds microfilm ledgers. Analysts scan roll after roll, looking for sales between late winter and mid-spring of 1995. A cash purchase stands out because the buyer used a personal name and no company, Owen Braddock. The line shows 2 inline fans, a set of HEPA filters, and fittings that match what the text pulled from the roofline. A background check shows Braddock as an independent HVAC technician with small contracts at remote utility stations near the forest. Older notes show a brief stint as an assistant with a different scout troop years earlier that ended without formal complaint, but with concerns about boundaries. The record is thin and careful. Investigators do not leap to the end. They line up pieces, access skill timing. Rental records from a county overlist an excavator and a small dozer in Braddock's name in March 1995, the kind of equipment that could dig and bury a container without help. The supplier remembers him as quiet and tidy with returns. A judge signs a warrant. Teams plan an early entry at Braddock's home and workshop, aiming to secure tools, records, and any drawings that might connect the design they saw underground to a person who knew how to move air without being seen. The search starts before dawn. Agents secure the small house and step into a workshop that looks like a catalog photo, pegboard with chalk outlines for wrenches, bins labeled in a neat hand, coils of wire looped by size. In a locked file cabinet, they find a manila folder with graph paper sheets taped together to form a larger drawing. The sketch shows a buried container with a hatch on the short end, duct runs branching out and away to disguised intakes and exhaust, and notes about fan capacity and filter change intervals. The angles and measurements match the scene in the forest to a degree that wipes away coincidence. An upstairs attic space holds boxes of records, including receipts from the out-of-county rental yard, dated a few months before the boys vanished. Another box holds letters never mailed, written in the second person to M and T, describing routines in a safe underground home. The language is controlling and detached. None of it describes harm directly, but none of it reads like a healthy mind. When Braddock is brought to a room and shown copies of the drawings next to photos of the container vents, he works hard to hold a straight line of denial. He says the design was a hypothetical for a storm shelter, that the equipment was used for a repair job, that the rentals were for a cousin's property. As each claim is checked and comes apart, his answers grow shorter. When investigators mention the red cord not found at the cave and ask how a man who never hiked with the boys could describe it so clearly, he blinks too slowly. Later, he states that he approached the brothers on the forest road as the storm built, offered a ride to keep them safe, and took them instead to the buried room he had prepared. He says he returned to the cave after and tied the knot to point the search in the wrong direction. The words land without heat. The transcript is not read into any camera. It is folded into the file and held. The practical next step is to ask for locations. He gives one. The location he offers is a hard place to reach, a spur off a spur, a slope under a stand of oak where the roots clutch stone. Crews move in with care to avoid tearing ground that has held its shape for years. Flags mark a grid, and shovels move slow. Soil colors change as hands go deeper. When they find bone, the line of people becomes still in a way that makes the air sound louder. Forensic teams take over, and the measure of hours stretches into the quiet kind that pulls at the chest. Identification later confirms the remains as Mason Hale. There is no need for graphic explanation. The fact is enough, and it is more than the family had for 9 years. The site yields nothing else. Asked about Tyler, Braddock's story turns soft at the edges. He says the younger boy escaped years after, that he returned one day and found the hatch open and the room empty. The claim does not match what investigators know about the locks, about the way the hatch was secured from above, about the drawings that show no interior release. They search sectors beyond the burial site for Tyler with dogs and probes and aerial scans when leaves are down. They find old deer beds, a rusted stove door, a tire half buried and filled with leaves, and nothing that ties to a person. The container itself offers no viable DNA after years of moisture and temperature swings. The story collapses into 2 certainties and 1 open space. Mason is brought home and laid to rest. Owen Braddock is the man who built and used the room. Tyler is still somewhere beyond a circle that lines keep trying to close. In town, people stand on porches at dusk and think about porch lights, about what they mean and how long they can burn. Prosecutors charge kidnapping and murder in Mason's case and kidnapping in Tyler's. Braddock's attorney studies the evidence table, drawings, rental slips, part numbers, the pendant, but there is no angle to push that does not break under weight. A plea avoids a death penalty trial and sets the term at life without parole. In court, the language is steady and spare. The family speaks briefly. They thank searchers by naming groups instead of individuals because there are too many faces to hold at once. They ask if anyone remembers anything about a pickup scene near the South Road in July 1995 or heard talk about hidden rooms or vents to come forward even if it feels small. The scoutmaster, older now, sits with a folded program in both hands. Elliot, grown into a young man, stands at the back and remembers the cave mouth and the cord and the way boys look to each other for cues about courage. The town adjusts its story about the storm. It is no longer about nature taking two boys. It is about a person who used weather as cover in a plan that hid behind wind and water. The forest remains itself, but people do not step into it with the same easy trust. The church hall photo of the troop gets a brass frame. The porch light at the Hale house keeps its place. On the 9th anniversary, the family invites the pastor and a few friends for coffee and quiet talk. They say Mason's name aloud and leave a chair empty beside them. Not as theater, but because absence is a real thing that takes up room. After the hearing, a deputy drives out to the cut block and sits in his truck for a long time, looking at the stand of pines that now sway gently like ordinary trees. He thinks about the logger who made a hard choice on a tight schedule and decides to write him a letter. If there is a lesson that can be carried without causing harm, it is that small decisions and small details move heavy stories. A logger stopped and called instead of burying a problem to meet a deadline. A serial number on a fan housing still read through rust and connected to a ledger on microfilm that most companies would have tossed. A knot that looked like a boy's pride turned out to be a planted sign meant to send people away from the truth, and recognizing it as misdirection reframed the case. The container's design told investigators where to look for the person who built it. Not a quarry foreman or a passing hunter, but someone who knew air and quiet and how to hide work in plain sight. The legal in brought one son home and set a man behind walls. The other son's absence remains a line that runs through the family's days. In the community, people begin to pair the phrase storm warning with a second thought. Plans can hide in noise. The scouts still hike, but leaders point at gullies and teach why you don't trust any shelter in a flood path. Journalists who covered the story learned to ask for the maintenance records and the parts lists, because those are the papers that often carry the fingerprints of intent. Each July, Joanna replaces the porch bulb before it burns out, not because it is dim, but because she will not risk its going dark by accident. Elliot, now old enough to lead younger hikers, ties and unties a red cord hitch on a rope during talks and explains that tools can be used to help or to mislead, and the difference is responsibility. When new loggers start on crews near Red Cedar, supervisors tell them about the hatch under the pines in simple words, without drama. Call it in, they say. Let light in. Some stories end fast. This one did not, but it did move because people noticed what should not have been there and did the next right thing. That is what broke the silence and what keeps a light on for Tyler for as long as it takes.